Welcome to the inaugural episode of the Between the Lines podcast, hosted by myself, Nitish Sharma.
And I'm Jay Cannon.
And on this podcast, we'll pretty much just be discussing the NBA, the NFL, and any other pressing sports topics. So let's hop right into it and talk about the NBA. The standings, now that we're after the All-Star break, some of the standings are starting to get a little finalized, but there's still some room for teams to go up and down. So start in the East. And Jay, which teams do you think are underperforming right now?
So I think coming into the season, we all had big expectations for one team down in South Florida, and that's the Orlando Magic. And I think everyone coming into the season, especially building off what they had last year, and then going into this season, we know they had a hard fought battle with the Celtics in the first round last year, a 2-7 matchup that they lost. But we saw the beginnings of what could be a good foundation with under head coach Jamal Mosley, and then obviously their star player Paulo Banchero. Right, we saw the foundations of a tough team with a good defense and everything like that, just happening to be missing the shot making aspect. That's why then in the offseason they went out and acquired Desmond Bain from the Memphis Grizzlies for a high price, right? A lot of first round draft picks, but they were able to give that up. And they were thinking they're acquiring a good sharpshooter, help that 3 point percentage get up, and then help the shooting overall and the offense overall. But unfortunately, that's not how it works. They're still one of the bottom. They're still one of the bottom tier offenses in the league. And Paulo Banchero has not improved in terms of like the efficiency as a shot maker and a jump shooter. He's still shooting a pretty inefficient level. And he still tends to you'll just see times he'll just dribble the air out of the basketball when he's on offense. And he's settling for too many of these contested twos and things like that without expanding the game to the 3 pointer line, without expanding his game to the 3 point line. So just seeing things like that, and obviously how the offense hasn't improved, and you wonder, have they sort of reached the ceiling under Jamal Mosley as head coach? Could you see a potential move in the offseason with them moving off of him? So that's probably one of the biggest underperformers that I've seen. And what about another underperforming team you might think, maybe one in the Big Apple in the New York Knicks?
Yeah, I mean, about the Magic, I think it's like the best way to put it is there's a reason Paulo Banchero has the best nickname in the NBA, PB No J. It's
Yeah.
he doesn't have the J right now, but
Yeah.
yeah, I think the Knicks are an underperforming team right now. Not that they aren't like a high seed, they're the number three seed right now, but with the Pacers having no Halliburton this year, with Giannis being banged up, no Tatum, this was supposed to be the year for the Knicks to like take over the East, but instead they've been pretty much just fighting for third. They're not even that close to the Celtics at number two. And so no real major injuries. They've lost like Anunoby for a little bit of time, but they've been relatively healthy, all things considered. They just haven't really put it together yet. And I mean, when they face the Pistons this year, it's been not really that close. So I wonder going into the playoffs, can they turn it around? Like Jalen Brunson, he's unbelievable, but can they get things going to make a deep run in the playoffs? I guess we'll see. But as of now, I think the Knicks have definitely been underperforming a bit.
Yeah, I agree with that. And even with the acquisition of Carl Towns from 2 years ago, right? So this is the second year in the system and everything. And our new head coach, Mike Brown, obviously changing from the system that they were running with Tom Thibodeau, trying to focus more on the offensive end. They've still been able to have like somewhat of a balanced team, but I guess it's just hard. It's hard for any NBA team, especially one with this high of expectations, to go into the playoffs and expect to win 4 rounds with your starting point guard and your starting center most nights being a complete turnstile on defense. And just having making it so that Josh Hart, OG Anunoby, and Mikal Bridges, and then obviously guys are bringing off the bench, like Jose Alvarado, one of their newest acquisitions, and then Mitchell Robinson, just having to like clean up for that on the defensive end and just stretching their roles even more. So just having them making sure they have to do even more, that's just harder for them as a team. So that's one thing that's made it harder. And one of the last teams we're going to touch on in the underperforming section for the East, just a quick one is we're going to have happen on the Milwaukee Bucks. And obviously, their expectations weren't that high as two of the other teams, the two previous teams we just discussed going into the season. But when you do have a guy that's probably definitely a solidified top five player in the world, arguably top three player in the world, in Giannis Antetokounmpo, coming in the season, regardless of what the roster is like, and obviously it's not a top tier roster or anything like that, you just expect that they're going to be making some noise in the playoffs, maybe winning a round or two, or potentially reaching the conference finals. But that has just not been the deal this season. Obviously, some of that is due to the injuries towards Giannis. He's had a couple calf injuries this season, leading to him being out for extended periods of time. But even with outside of that, you just still haven't seen any improvement in the roster. Obviously, they do have Ryan Rollins, their starting point guard this season, who's in the conversation for most improved player, which we're going to touch on later in this episode. But that's really the only been bright spot outside of that. Starting two guard AJ Green, he is a 3 point sniper, but he's not offering too much outside of that. We have a guy in Kyle Kuzma that's playing the small forward position, but we all know what Kyle Kuzma is and what he isn't, and it's pretty clear at this point in his career. And obviously, the move to get off of Dame's contract with the waive and stretch in the offseason was a big move, and then using that in turn to acquire Miles Turner. It's a good move, and it was a good move to try and keep him in the city of Milwaukee and make sure he doesn't want to leave. And obviously, it's worked up until this point. But coming up to the trade deadline, we saw that there was a lot of sort of just like Giannis flirting with going to other destinations, other teams, and things like that. So it didn't really work out the way they'd expected in terms of the wins this season, but it's still somewhat of an underperforming season from the Milwaukee Bucks. Expected to be a team that's somewhat competing for the low end of the playoffs or high end of the play-in in the standings, but now they've dropped completely out, even behind teams like the Charlotte Hornets and the Atlanta Hawks and things like that. So that's one team that's been underperforming the season. But let's move on to a little bit of a brighter side. Let's talk about some of the teams that we think are overperforming or somewhat surprises going into this. So, what's one of your biggest surprise teams going into the season from the Eastern Conference?
Yeah, I think right off the bat, Celtics have been pretty much exceeding everyone's expectations. I mean, not that they don't, I mean, obviously you have an MVP candidate in Jaylen Brown. You got defensive stud like Derek White. You got a lot of pieces, but when you don't have Jason Tatum for the majority of the year, people are even saying that they should just tank, throw in the towel, go for a good lottery pick. But I mean, Jaylen Brown has been playing out of it. You could argue he's a potential like first team All NBA level player. And he's really been like taking this team to the two seed that they are now. They can contend for the one seed still up for grabs. But I don't think anyone, including myself, saw the Celtics being. I mean, you could have argued that they would have made the playoffs, like maybe sneak in as like a seven seed, six seed, five seed. But to be out there dominating at the two seed without Tatum, and then now it's exciting because Tatum, he might be coming back. We saw the Sixers Celtics matchup later in March got flexed to prime time. So is Tatum coming back? We don't know, but he might be coming for the playoffs. So if you're a Celtics fan, you probably were coming into this year a little disappointed. Like, what's there to look forward to? No Tatum, but you're going to be the two seed. You're going to have Tatum coming back. It's going to be exciting. And yeah, I think the Celtics, they've been pretty good this year. But what's another team that you think's been outperforming so far?
Yeah, I think the easiest pick for overperforming team in the Eastern Conference after the Celtics obviously has got to be the Charlotte Hornets. So coming into this season and the last couple of years, they've just been a team that no one's really taken seriously at all. Obviously, the ownership situation hasn't really been that much of a serious issue before, and the coaching staff hasn't really seemed like they wanted to worry about like developing the players and things like that and developing a winning basketball culture. But now that's something that sort of seems like it's at the front of their minds. Obviously, drafting Con Canipolo as a rookie this season, they've got a good foundation with Brandon Miller, LaMelo Ball, and obviously they have a strong big man rotation. Right, they're getting um, another rookie at the big, another rookie in their big rotation this season, and then obviously Musa Diabate coming in there as well. So they've had a lot of good young talent this season, and they're finally starting to put it together on the court. It seems like, right? They're finally starting to put together, especially in winning ways, right? They had a game in January and they matched up with the San Antonio Spurs. They were actually able to take them down a home game, right? And it was a game where they had to change with the timing and flexing and everything due to like some weather conditions. They were still able to lock in, and that's the team that's what teams with a winning culture do, right? Even if there's outside things like that, they're still affecting the potential of like games and things like that. You still lock in and you take care of the teams when they're in your home court. So they're able to do that. And obviously, no one's expecting them to win anything this season, right? More than likely, if they are to make the playoffs, it's going to be as the eight seed, and they're more than likely matching with the Detroit Pistons. And no one's saying they're going to be beating the Detroit Pistons. But could you see them taking a game or two? I could see that, a home game maybe in Charlotte or something like that after Detroit's up 2-0 in the series. Could you even see them potentially stealing one game in Detroit? I could see that maybe one of the first two games if the Pistons decide they're not taking this team too serious or anything. That doesn't seem like something the Pistons would do just based on their culture, but you never know, right? It's in the playoffs, and a team that only been in the playoffs one time prior to this year, right? The Knicks battle last year in the first round, but you could see the Hornets taking a game off or something like that. So let's move on to the Western Conference round, right? So we've gotten a couple. We talked about the standings a little bit from the overperforming and underperforming side of the East. So let's talk about the West right now. So what are some of your teams that you feel like have underperformed in the Western Conference this year?
Yeah, I think one team is definitely the Houston Rockets. They started out the NBA season opening night, taking the defending champions to an overtime thriller, just slightly losing in the end. And I mean, I'm not a Rockets fan, but I was excited. They could really push for that one or two seed. A lot of young pieces, Amen Thompson, Şengün, Reed Shepherd. Oh, the acquisition of Kevin Durant, obviously, in the offseason. So it seemed like they got that big scoring piece to help, surround their offense around. And make a contending push. And they still are the 3 seed right now as things stand, but they've been one of the most inconsistent teams in the league. Like they lost to the Kings earlier this year. And then I mentioned that they at the same time took OKC in overtime, like a thriller. So it's weird. I think the Rockets, if they can get some consistency going, that'll help. I think Şengün has been really inconsistent. That's been a problem for them. And Kevin Durant's doing Kevin Durant things, getting 25 a night by any means possible. But we need some guys like Amen Thompson to step up. Maybe his offensive caliber isn't where it should be. And he should go to be more consistent. But I think the Rockets right now they're lacking the consistency to be considered seriously as a contender. What about you? What's another underperforming team in the West?
Yeah, so I'm actually going to go out west. I'm going to look at the two teams in LA, right? So obviously two teams that shared a stadium until recently, right? So they're both teams in LA, the Clippers and the Lakers. And we could talk about them. They're both in a little bit of different situations, but I'm sort of looking at it in the fact that they both have one player, the Clippers in Kawhi and the Lakers in Luka, that are just an absolutely transcendental star, right? Kawhi has been a little bit inconsistent with just the health in the recent years, but he's been pretty healthy up until so far this season, right? Obviously, we hope that continues, but just based on his past track record, we can't really expect that. But just with both of those stars and having a somewhat competent roster around them, right? Obviously, there's definitely holes they need to fix, and there's certain things they need to do to make the rosters better for the type of star they have. But it's just not working out the way you expect. Obviously, the Clippers with a really bad start this season, starting out with that 6-20 or 6-21 start, they're trying to build themselves back and like dig themselves out of that hole. But they're even because of how bad that start was and how like far down it put them in the standings, even of how well they've been playing recently, they still haven't been able to go above 500. They're still sitting at 27-31 as of this recording today. But you're still expecting them prior to the season to have a little bit better than record than we're right now, and at least be in the playoff mix like they were last year. On the other hand, the Lakers, obviously a team that's highly covered and everything like that, highly nationalized. But the best player on the team, Luka Doncic, obviously he has a roster around him that's not really fit exactly to his talents, not exactly filled with like rim runners and like sharpshooters to throw it out to on the wing. But he still does have one of the greatest players, if not the greatest player of all time, on his roster alongside him, LeBron. Very competent ball handler in Austin Reeves, who got a or pretty high contract recently in the line for getting another max contract, and just a couple of good players around him that we've seen Luca in the past bring up better players and things like that, and bring them up to his level and things like that. So we haven't been able to see that this season from the Lakers, and it's just something that they've been hovering around the play-in race the whole time. And I don't think no one definitely expects them to win a championship. I don't think anyone's picking them for the conference finals. And at this rate, are we even going to see them win a round at this rate? It's more than likely they're sitting at the 6th seed right now. They'd be matching up with the Rockets in round one. We already saw how that went on Christmas Day. The Rockets blowing them out in a 20-point victory when the Lakers had two of their stars healthy in LeBron and Luca. Or if they were to play the Minnesota Timberwolves, we already saw what happened exactly last year in this matchup, a 4-1 gentleman sweep by the Minnesota Timberwolves in that series with Edwards leading the way. So it's just something that we haven't seen. We just haven't seen it click the way we expected it for both of these LA teams. Not that we expect a championship from them, but we just haven't seen the exact type of success that we wanted, that we were looking at going into the season. So let's move on to the Western Conference overperformers. So what's one team that you think has overperformed their expectation during this season?
Yeah, I think the Phoenix Suns have really uh, overperformed what people were expecting them to do this year. Sitting at the 7 seed right now, just 1 game behind the Lakers. Trading Kevin Durant in the offseason, acquiring players like Jalen Green, Dylan Brooks, seemed like it's just going to be a bit of a down year. Like, let's reset, let's get a good pick, let's get a new lottery guy to build around. But I mean, they're like knocking some teams off. They beat the Lakers the other night. They own the Lakers season series. Dylan Brooks potentially an all-star snub. You could argue that. Devin Booker playing as doing Devin Booker things. The Suns have definitely overperformed. I don't think anyone saw them even being in the playoff games, maybe the play-in, but nowhere near the 7 seed potentially. And we know in the West, the Wild West, anywhere from seeds 3 to 10, 3 to 9, it's always a race between like 1 or 2 games. So Suns with just over about 20 games left in the regular season could really push for a higher seed. They have a lot of momentum right now. Obviously, Dylan Brooks just got injured, so that's going to be a bit of a problem. But if he can come back for the playoffs, they could be a scary team in the first round. Right now they match up against the Spurs, and while the Spurs have Wemby and a very good roster. They could knock off a game or two. They could really be a problem. There's an annoying team to play against, I feel like. So Suns are definitely one team that's been overperforming. And what about you, Jay? What's another team?
So I'm looking at a team you just mentioned, the San Antonio Spurs, led by Victor Wembanyama, obviously the generational talent. And so I'm looking at San Antonio as a team that we saw last season. At the beginning of last season, they were starting to win a lot more games and play better. With Chris Paul leading the way at point guard at the beginning of the season before the year and Fox edition. And we started to see that they were taking some teams, some of the better teams in the NBA last season to the wire and starting to win some games there, but nowhere near to the level that they are this season. Obviously, a fully healthy season from Victor Wembanyama. Hopefully, we can see that for the rest of the season. A lot of talented guards, right? They have De'Aaron Fox as sort of the veteran in that group, and they have Steph Castle, Dylan Harper, the rookie from this season. They just drafted number two overall. So they're starting a really strong backcourt rotation. Obviously, I have Harrison Barnes, Devin Vassell, Keldon Johnson, guys like that playing the wings and forward. Then you have obviously Victor starting at the center position and even a solid backup in the corner in case Victor needs minutes off the floor in the playoffs. So it's a team that obviously they're very young and they haven't even been in the playoffs together as this crew so far. So it's something that can we really expect them to win a championship without seeing them take their lumps in the playoffs, so to speak, as we've seen from almost every other champion in the past. That's something that has to be determined. We'll see how it happens, how it plays out in the playoffs this year. But that's definitely a team that's in the contention for a championship potentially and winning a couple rounds and maybe making the conference finals or the finals from the West. So let's move on to the talk of the contenders, and we're going to discuss a little bit about what we think are some of our top five contenders in the NBA. So, Natish, why don't you give me your top five contenders in order?
Yeah, so my top five, I think I'll start at number five. So I'll put the Timberwolves at number five. Anytime it's like once the playoffs start, I feel like Anthony Edwards just hits another level. And I mean, he's already having the best season of his career this year. Top five in scoring, playing unbelievable, but he just hits that second gear in the playoffs. And I mean, we've seen it two straight conference finals for him. I wouldn't be surprised if if he makes it back there again. I think the Spurs are sorry, not the Spurs, the Timberwolves. They're also relatively healthy. They could really make a push for the like the finals, but what's stopping me from putting them a little higher is just like the other teams in front. They're good, but there's some better teams. Like number four, I'll put the Pistons, currently the best record in the NBA, I believe, and um, they have a lot going for them. I mean, Kay Cunningham, potential MVP if Shea, Jokic don't meet the 65 game minimum. You have Jalen Duren, another All Star. You have a lot of good pieces on that team. Beef Sue, the enforcer, giving them what they need in the playoffs. So I like the Pistons. The reason I don't have them a little higher is just because it's a little hard for me to rank a young team higher. It feels like they might be 1 year away, but I would not be surprised if they made it to the finals whatsoever. They definitely could make it there. I'll just put them a little low because they're a little young. And then number three, I'll put the Spurs. Similar reason as the Pistons for not being higher is just because it feels like they're a very young team that's like 1 year away. And they could definitely make a run. They could make it far. I mean, Victor Wembanyama, the unicorn, he can single-handedly win them probably one or two rounds. And the underrated part about the team is just their guard rotation. As Jay mentioned, we have like, not we have, they have Dylan Harper, Devin Vassell, De'Aaron Fox, so many good players on that team that really are just defensive nightmares for the other team as well. So the Spurs are my number three contender. And moving to number two, I'll put the Nuggets. I mean, we saw last year that classic 7 game series between OKC and Denver was some really fantastic basketball being played. You had the two MVP frontrunners going head to head. And now that Jokic is back from injury, he's in a bit of a shooting slump right now, but I mean, Jokic is still doing Jokic things, triple doubles left and right, creating points for everyone on the team. If he can get out of his slump, they can really make a push. And also Jamal Murray, first All Star of his career, went to the next level this year. He's always been around that 21, 22 points per game range. Now he's up to nearly 25, and put them at number two. But yeah, number one has to be OKC. I mean, they could go back to back, in my opinion. They have Shea. This team is the acquisition of Jared McCain at the trade deadline, bringing what they need off the bench. They've had J-Dub last year. He was, all NBA, all defensive. He's been injured for the majority of the year. Shea was injured for about, I believe, like 10 games. And they still are finding their way to just win games. Like they beat the Cavs the other night without Shea. They're looking really good. And it's hard to not put them at number one. But what about you, Jay? What's your top five?
Yeah, so a lot of the similar teams, I think almost the exact same teams we're going to have, just a little bit of a different order. So I'm going to do the same as you, start from five and go up to one. So now my number five team is the San Antonio Spurs. Like we talked about, they are a very talented team, very good depth in the backcourt rotation. Obviously, the star player in Wemby, but just too young, and we haven't seen them in the playoffs at all. And NBA history tells us you need to have at least one season where you face a more established team and take a loss, and you just learn how it works. So that's why they're my number five team. Next, I have the Minnesota Timberwolves, led by Anthony Edwards. I have them in fourth, and the reason I have them here is because we've seen that they have the star player, right? We've seen him rise to the occasion in the playoffs, obviously making back-to-back conference finals after a first round loss to the Denver Nuggets 3 years ago, right? So back to back finals, and they're beating the Nuggets 2 years ago. And they beat two legendary players on the way to the conference finals last year. The first round beating LeBron James and Luca, and then beating Stephen Curry and Jimmy Butler. Obviously, Steph getting injured in that series, but still beating Jimmy Butler and the Warriors in the round two of the playoffs last year to make the Western Conference Finals. So we just seen them do it before. Can they do it again, make the conference finals, and potentially break through to the finals this year? We'll have to see. Third team I have is the Denver Nuggets. And obviously, like you said before, Jokic coming back from his injury is still in a little bit of a shooting slump. They're still missing Aaron Gordon, still from this hamstring injury. So that's something we want to keep track on, just make sure, is he really going to come back? And when he comes back, is he still going to be at full strength? Jamal Murray, first time All Star, is still playing very well, and they have their good rotation pieces. You just wish you can get a little bit more of Cam Johnson, someone they traded a valuable asset for to get last season. Obviously, getting back Bruce Brown and seeing Peyton Watson and guys like that take a little bit of a step up is good, but you want to get a little bit more for a guy that you paid a hefty price for in a trade last offseason. Number two, I have the Detroit Pistons. Obviously, a very young team, but I do think that loss to the Knicks last year in a very hard fought series, and a series that could have gone a couple different ways. They had a pretty decent lead in game one of that series that they ended up choking away in the fourth quarter. They had a good lead. They could have stolen game one on the road in MSG. And then obviously in game four, you see a close game that goes down. A deep cat three in the end of the fourth quarter was something that really like helped the Knicks get over the hurdle in that game. And then game six, the potential elimination game for them, they played it very close and it had to take a Jalen Brunson game winning shot in the last couple of seconds to win that game. So that's something I think they've taken their sort of lumps, so to speak, last year in the playoffs. And I think they can make their way all the way to the finals this year and potentially take down whoever comes out of the West. But obviously, number one in the West, we number one in the NBA, number one from the West, we have the OKC Thunder. Just the team we have to see, are they really a little bit more flawed than they are last season, or is it potentially they're just not taking the regular season as seriously, maybe because they have the championship under their belt and things like that. So we'll have to see how it works out in the playoffs this year. So we're gonna do one last thing related to the standings, and we're just gonna do our ideal conference finals matchup. So Natish, give me your ideal conference final matchup from both conferences.
Yeah, I'd say in the West, I really want to see the Nuggets versus Timberwolves. I feel like it's a rivalry in the making. They matched up in conference finals in the past, and anytime they just played today, actually, and anytime they match up, it's going to get a little chippy. It's going to be a good basketball to watch. So seeing Jokic going head to head, I mean, who doesn't want to see that? And then out in the East, I'd say kind of want to see Pistons Cavs. It might not be two kind of small market teams, but feels like they just played the other day in overtime. Things got chippy. Cleveland was missing Mitchell and Harden, and the Pistons won, but it seems like there's a bit of a rivalry there as well between two of the top teams in the East. So I like to see them in the conference finals in the East, also because we've also seen some of these other teams there before, like the Celtics and Knicks. But there are a lot of good matchups in the East, but I go with Cavs Pistons. What about you?
So in the West, I'm going to take the San Antonio Spurs versus the Minnesota Timberwolves. I would love to see that. Two of the youngest and brightest stars in our game. Obviously, one international star in Wemby and one domestic star in Anthony Edwards. Anthony Edwards very quickly becoming my favorite young player in the league to watch. Just the type of game he has, the type of confidence he plays with, and obviously Wemby is quickly climbing up those rankings for me too. So just seeing those two guys and the cores that each of those front offices have built around those stars and just seeing how they're playing, I'd love to see a matchup between those two teams. In the East, I'm actually going to take a team almost the opposite of you. I'm taking two very big market teams. I would take the New York Knicks and the Boston Celtics. So it's a little bit dependent on potentially seeing Jason Tatum come back. I feel like this would make the series even more interesting. But seeing the Knicks and the Celtics battle in a rematch of a series that we saw last year, obviously the Knicks winning the first two games in that series and still having the lead in game four, even before Jason Tatum goes down with the torn Achilles. But the Knicks were in control to win that series, and I'd just like to see a rematch of that, potentially with different and reinvigorated Jalen Brown playing a little bit different style, and maybe Jason Tatum playing a little bit more of a backseat style in that series. All right, so now we're going to delve into the awards a little bit and go into a couple of the main awards here, and then we'll talk a little about tanking a little bit later to end the pod. So we're first going to talk about MVP. So Nitish, I'm going to ask you, who is your MVP pick at this point in the season with a few games left to go?
Yeah, I think the awards this year are a little interesting because now you have to account for the 65 game minimum. So that factors in a lot. Actually, I think mostly for MVP because to me, it's pretty much just who's going to stay healthy. I mean, Shea just missed about 2 weeks with the abdominal strain. Jokic was out with the bone bruise for some time. We know Wemby was injured. So I think right now, Shea still has enough of a buffer. He returned from injury. He's still a bit limited. He didn't play in the overtime game. But if Shea can stay healthy, he'll probably get it. But I mean, it still is a few games. If something does, unfortunately, I'm not wishing anything on him, but if anything does unfortunately happen, then we can see a guy like Cade winning it, number one seed in the East, very deserving of the MVP. But ultimately, I think if Shea stays healthy, he's going to go back to back with MVP. What about you?
I'm gonna say the same as you. I'm gonna go with Shea Gilgeous-Alexander for my MVP pick. Just we've seen him this season. We've seen the Thunder without him be a little bit more vulnerable than they have in the past year, right? Obviously, there's a lot of talk about the Thunder being a very good team, almost like super team-esque in the way they're built. Just a lot of role players that are very well and starring in their role. But we've seen that they haven't been as potent this year without Shea on the floor. So that's just something that leads into his case a little bit more. But like you said, I think if he was to not meet the games requirement and Jokic, obviously the two front runners, if they're both unable to meet the games requirement, I think Cade's the clear choice for me right after that because he's been someone that's been in charge of leading the Detroit Pistons in terms of their culture and everything, and leading him to winning in the way they are right now under Coach JB Bickerstaff. So let's move on to Defensive Player of the Year. This one should be pretty easy. I'm going to guess we have the same one, but I'm going with Victor Wembanyama for my Defensive Player of the Year, and I'm guessing you're going with the same player there.
Yeah, I mean, he's just like a generational defender. I saw some like highlights the other day of his like the way he blocks shots is just so different from a traditional when a big man tries to block a shot, usually they're trying to swat it as far away as they can. But Wemby is so like, such a smart defender that he tries to block it so that he tips the ball back to himself. Like he doesn't try to swat out in the stands. So he's getting like 5 stocks a game pretty much. He's equal. It can't be anyone else. As long as he meets the minimum, it's going to be him.
Yeah, I agree with that. And then we're going to briefly touch on Coach of the Year. I think this one is also almost as in line as it could possibly be as we are with Defensive Player of the Year. I think this is clearly Coach JB Bickerstaff for the Detroit Pistons. He's been responsible for their turnarounds for the last couple seasons too. And just seeing how he was obviously the coach of the Cleveland Cavaliers before and leading them to a significant amount of wins, but they just couldn't get where they wanted in the playoffs. And obviously, Detroit brings him in to sort of help rebuild that culture. And we've seen how they've taken on that defensive identity, similar to the bad boy Pistons of the late 80s and then even the Detroit Pistons teams of the early 2000s that were able to take down Shaq and Kobe and the Lakers. And we're just able to see how they're building a team that's embodying like the city that they play in, Detroit itself, that type of like tough style, that gritty style of defense. And they have their star player in Cade Cunningham, and he's allowed him to just build into that role as the main creator in offense, right? Be the point guard, just absolutely determining everything on offense, right? And they have a lot of good players around him, and they have some strong players coming off the bench that can control the ball and things like that, but they're still having a very good season. And a lot of that is due to Coach JB Bickerstaff. All right, so to end the show today, we're gonna go with one topic that has was obviously the hot button topic around the time of the All Star break. Obviously, because there's no NBA basketball, then that was something a lot of the talk shows and talking heads wanted to discuss. So we're just gonna briefly touch on it here, right? Not too much to discuss about it, but obviously one of the biggest issues in the NBA is tanking, right? Something that Adam Silver's had to confront his whole time as commissioner. So we brought together a couple solutions that we've seen in the media and things like that online. And we're going to go through a couple of these solutions and what we sort of think about them and what are some potential drawbacks or like downfalls to them and just discuss them overall. So one of the first ones that we saw when we were doing our research was that for teams that finish in the bottom four or bottom three of the standings for 3 years in a row, that means you can't get a top three or top four pick in the next year, right? So an example here would be the San Antonio Spurs, right? Obviously, so in the 23, 24, and 25 draft, they have a top four pick in all of them. Obviously, in 23, number one overall, getting Wemby. In 24, they would have get the number four pick and grab Steph Castle from UConn. And then last year, most recently, they were able to get the second overall pick and grab Dylan Harper from Rutgers. So let's say they had all that this season, and somehow due to injuries or something like that, or the team wasn't meshing well, they still ended in the bottom four of the standings, and they ended up with the top four pick. The way this would work is they would not be able to get that top four pick, right? So they most likely be pushed out to the five spot or something like that, and they wouldn't be able to get that pick. So one issue with that though is you do see that how you sort of have to figure out how is the structure going to work for teams that now are jumping into the top four. So could a team that also maybe just was in the bottom five of the standings, so they just missed out in this bottom four, but they were the fifth worst team or something like that. Now are they getting pushed into the top four slot for the pick? So it could work against the favor in terms of like teams that are still tanking, but maybe not tanking as well or not tanking as much or something like that. Are they getting rewarded with better picks? And that's not something we want to see, and that's really not going to solve the problem. And so one of the next solutions that Nitish is going to go into is talking about standings freezing after a deadline or a certain date. So why don't you discuss that one a little bit?
Yes, this one's also been a pretty hot topic. One of the more popular solutions out there. Pretty much just the idea of once the trade deadline ends in like February, just freezing the standings. So this one has like pros and cons, like all the solutions out there. One of the pros would be that, like if you, the idea is that if you freeze the standings earlier, then the games later on, there's no incentive to lose them if your standings are already locked for the lottery. But I think this one has a bit more problems than benefits. I mean, ultimately, you just would see tanking earlier in the season. Like rather than seeing teams tank in like February, March, you just see it earlier before the deadline. So I don't know if it actually gets to the root of the problem. You might see some better basketball after the deadline, like players playing for contract incentives, the vets trying to play for the love of the game. But I don't think this one really does anything. It just makes tanking happen earlier rather than later. And then there's one more popular solution out there. This one's actually been talked about in the NFL world as well, which we'll talk about in future podcasts. But uh, the idea of once you've been mathematically eliminated from playoff contention, the more wins you have, the better your position in the lottery. So pretty much incentivizing winning after elimination. What are your thoughts about that one, Jay?
Yeah, honestly, most of the ones we've seen before, we can find sort of like poke holes and things like that and see drawbacks with this one. This one, I really can't. I'm struggling to find like a big drawback with this one, right? So let's say a team was to be eliminated next week. Let's say the Brooklyn Nets or the Indiana Pacers were mathematically eliminated from playoffs from this week onwards. Then it would be from that point onwards until the end of the season in mid-April. All their loss or all their wins will help them count towards their draft pick position, right? So almost their wins are almost helping bolster their losses in terms of getting a higher overall draft pick. So that's something I could see like helping the standings, right? The one issue with it, I guess you could say, is maybe like teams are still going to be tanking earlier in the season. It's not going to fix the problem of tanking until they get eliminated. So it might still be an issue with that, but that's like happening now regardless. So that's not something that's like going to like immediately change that part of it. But I do think that that could help tanking later in the season, right? So that's going to help us see less tanking in the March and April time versus how we're seeing it now. So I think that's one that's probably the best solution that we've seen so far and doesn't have any like big issues with it so far. All right. And that takes us to the end of our first episode of Between the Lines. So thank you for tuning into episode one of the show, and we'll see you next time.